Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Murder a la Christie by Marilyn Levinson. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Write that book if you dare, but you won't live to see it in print. I stared at the two older women, the usually subdued Gerda Stein, her face flushed with anger, and my dear friend Sylvia, but neither seemed aware that I'd entered the kitchen. Sylvia shook her head in dismay. I've no wish to upset you, but your father's story is the keystone of my book. He was a Nazi, Gerda, and responsible for killing thousands of innocent people. I know what my father was. Fury made Gerda's German accent more pronounced. But I told you about him in confidence, not so you'd write about it and expose him to the world. I cleared my throat. The meeting's about to begin. I came in for water, I added, to apologize for my intrusion during this highly volatile and personal exchange. I made a beeline for the sink and turned on the faucet. From the corner of my eye, I watched Gerda stomp out of the room. After that outburst, I wondered if she'd be staying for the first meeting of the Golden Age of Mystery Book Club, which I'd been asked to lead. Someone touched my shoulder, and I almost dropped the glass I was filling. I turned and caught Sylvia's expression of concern. I'm sorry you had to hear that, Lexie. Gerda can be the most stubborn, obstinate person I know. She threatened you. Sylvia dismissed any possibility of danger with a wave of her hand. She doesn't mean it, though I must admit in the 30 years we've been neighbors, I've never seen her this agitated. Before I could respond, my best friend Rosie burst in, bristling with exasperation. Lexie, what are you doing in here? Everyone's waiting for you. Sylvia and I murmured our apologies and followed our hostess across the marble-floored hall, through the living room, and into the rosewood-paneled library. Rosie and Sylvia joined the others on 3 leather couches placed around the coffee table now littered with glasses, cups, and half-eaten desserts. The antique desk I'd claimed for my notes formed the fourth side of the square. Gerda hadn't left after all, but sat glowering in the far corner of the room. I smiled as I passed around handouts filled with bios of Golden Age of Mystery authors and their novels. I went to stand in front of the desk. In the silence, I intoned, Now, let us speak about murder. Pleased to have captured everyone's full attention, I continued. I refer, of course, to literary murder during the Golden Age of Mystery. This period refers to mysteries written between the 2 world wars by authors still read by millions of readers. Agatha Christie, Nagia Marsh, Rex Stout, Ellery Queen, and several others I've listed for you to read about at your leisure. Papers crackled as the members glanced through the pages I've distributed. You'll note that most of the authors are English and American. Tonight, we'll talk about Dame Agatha Christie, queen of the detective novel. I segued into the abbreviated bio. Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller was born in 1890 in Torquay, England. Her father was American, and she was homeschooled. Her life presents a mystery of its own. After her husband told her he wanted a divorce to marry his lover, Agatha disappeared. They found her 11 days later in a Yorkshire hotel, supposedly having suffered a bout of amnesia. The members entered into a lively discussion of the film Agatha. After I commented that the movie was a highly fictionalized version of what certainly hadn't occurred during Christie's disappearance, Rosie flashed me a warning glance. The professor and me longed to redirect the conversation to the book we were scheduled to analyze, but Rosie's earlier advice came through loud and clear. You're leading a book club, not teaching Chaucer to a class of English majors. Expect plenty of digressions, interruptions, and comments. People join book clubs to express their opinions and speak their mind. Eventually, I managed to get back on track. Agatha Christie's second husband was an archaeologist. She accompanied him on expeditions to the Middle East, the setting of several of her books. During World War I, she worked in a hospital and a pharmacy where she learned a good deal about drugs. Many of her murderers used poison to kill their victims. Todd Taylor, the only male in the room, grinned. So you're saying old Agatha had plenty of first-hand experience poisoning people? I smiled back at the handsome young man sitting next to Ginger, Rosie's youngest daughter. No, Todd, that's not what I'm saying. I'm pointing out that she knew a good deal about toxicology and made use of this knowledge in her novels. Ginger poked him in the ribs. Please excuse Todd's bad behavior, Aunt Lexie. He's giddy from taking his last law exam. I'll behave, Todd said to Ginger rather than to me as they exchanged knowing glances. Oh, and when did this come about? Rosie had never breathed a word that Ginger and Todd were dating, or whatever the going expression was this year. My memory flashed back to a skinny little girl trailing after the older boy who lived down the block even when he made her hold his can of worms. Suddenly, I felt decades older than my 48 years. Rosie beamed at the two lovebirds, her obvious approval out there for anyone to notice. Beside her, Sylvia stared into space. I wondered if she was mentally at work on her current manuscript, or was she still reeling from her encounter with Gerda? I cleared my throat and returned to my duties as facilitator. Hercule Poirot makes his first appearance in The Mysterious Affair of Styles, Christie's first published novel, which came out in 1920. As for Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective features in over 80 of Christie's stories. I smiled. Poirot's so famous that when he died, his obituary appeared in the Times. Before we talk about the plot, would any of you care to share your opinions regarding Dame Agatha's writing in general? Yes, Ruth. Ruth Blessing, a petite, attractive woman in her mid-50s, cocked her sleekly coiffed head. Though Christie wrote this book almost 100 years ago, the language is simple and straightforward. I zipped right through it. Dame Agatha's style is thoroughly enjoyable, a primary reason why she's still widely read, I said. Anyone else? She knows of the evil that lurks in all our hearts, Todd said. I shivered, remembering Gerda's fierce threat issued minutes ago. Surely she wouldn't kill Sylvia for refusing to do as she demanded, but she wanted to. Had I ever wanted to kill anyone? Perhaps my second husband. Lexie, Rosie prompted. Fess up. Has everyone read the novel? I asked. Everyone but Anne Chadwick, my clever young lawyer, raised a hand. Even embarrassed, she looked smashing, a slightly older version of the blonde all-American model she'd been in her teens. She gave an apologetic laugh. Sorry, I've been working late every single night these last few weeks. I read the first few chapters, but that's as far as I got. I smiled at Anne and went on. The story takes place in Styles, an Essex County manor. Everyone present at the time of the murder is a relative or has a close connection to the victim. Kind of like us, Ginger offered. We all know each other, and while the layout of our home is different, it's something like Styles, isn't it? I suppose, I reluctantly agreed because her observations were right on target. Even I knew everyone in the group had known them for ages, and the Gordons' house in Old Cadfield, one of the wealthiest communities on Long Island, was almost as large as the manor house in the novel. Now, for the mystery. A rich widow, recently married to a much younger man, is poisoned. Would anyone like to comment on the other characters and their relationships to one another? Emily's rich because she inherited her stepson's fortune, Ruth observed, but the two young men don't seem to resent her for it. Seem being the operative word, her daughter Marcy contributed. We don't know what they feel. When Emily's murdered, the brothers are the logical suspects. So's the husband, Todd offered. He's one weird dude and 20 years younger than Emily. They no sooner marry and she dies. It's pretty clear he's done it. I nodded. But he has an alibi. He's away from home when his wife is murdered, as is Emily's personal assistant, who leaves Styles in a tiff and warns that Emily's in danger from her nearest and dearest. Foreshadowing, Marcy murmured. Yes, indeed. I glanced around the room to check my audience's interest. Even Gerda leaned forward in her chair, intrigued by our discussion. But Sylvia slumped against the arm of the sofa she shared with Ruth and Rosie, her hand clasped to her stomach. All thoughts of facilitating fled my mind. Syl, what's wrong? She blinked as though puzzled by my question. I don't know. My heart's racing and my stomach hurts. I feel weird. Spacey. Apprehension appeared on everyone's face. Sylvia had a heart condition. We all feared she was experiencing another episode. All of us but Rosie, who rarely lost her cool. Syl, if your stomach hurts, you probably ate something that didn't agree with you. Just the thing to help you feel better. A few grunts escaped as she struggled to her feet. My college roommate had gained in considerable girth since our younger days, but her face remained as beautiful and cherubic as ever. I'll go upstairs and get it for you. Sylvia's forehead glistened with perspiration as she stumbled past the couches. I'll come with you. I don't want to disturb everyone. Ruth turned to her. Did you take your medicine today? Yes, of course, Sylvia gasped. I felt a chill in my heart. I'd never seen her this ill. I started to rise. Syl, let me take you home and call your doctor. No, Lexie. Go on with the meeting. Rosie will look after me. Are you sure? Sylvia nodded, her eyes pleading that I do as she asked. I sat down, not wanting to upset her further. I'd wait 5 minutes, then check on her. And if she wasn't any better, I was calling her doctor whether she liked it or not. Paulette Hartman's thoughts must have been running along the same track as mine because she jumped up from the couch she shared with Marcy and Anne. "Rosie, let me help," she pleaded. "I'll stay with Sylvia until she feels better." Rosie stopped in her tracks to roll her eyes at me. She was fond of her younger cousin, but considered Paulette a twit who couldn't do anything right, from finishing college to holding a job. Though she had managed to snag a wonderful husband, a bright, up-and-coming lawyer who worked in the same firm as Anne. I knew from Rosie the young couple was trying to start a family. "Thanks, Paulette," Rosie said firmly, "but I'll see to this." Paulette's face burned as pink as her blouse. I want to help. Sylvia mustn't suffer." Maybe Paulette wasn't the sharpest pencil in the box, as they say, but she had a kind heart. "Please," Sylvia bleated. "You're all making too much of a fuss. I'll be fine." Rosie took Sylvia's arm and urged her toward the hall staircase. "Come, dear, we'll get you upstairs where you can lie down and rest. If you don't feel better soon, I'll call your doctor." To Paulette, who persisted in following, she snapped, "Sit down and let Lexie get on with the discussion." Embarrassed, Paulette whispered, "Sorry, Lexie." I watched in astonishment as she dashed out of the library. Another emotional outburst which made me wonder if Paulette was pregnant and suffering from hormonal swings. Earlier this evening, she'd been put out when her husband Lowell arrived with Anne and had forgotten to stop by their house for her cardigan as she'd requested. I couldn't fathom if Paulette was annoyed with her husband, with Anne, or with both of them. However, by the time Rosie had called our meeting to order, she and Anne appeared to be on cordial terms and were sitting beside one another. By now, I'd completely lost track of what I'd been saying, so I decided to talk about the other characters in the novel. A doctor specializing in poison is a visitor at Styles. What else does he turn out to be? A German spy, Ginger rang out. Gerda gasped and fled from the room. What a meeting this was turning out to be. People were dropping out of sight like the characters in And Then There Were None as they're killed off one by one. Rosie returned to the library. "Sylvia's resting in the guest room," she said as she took her seat. Ruth leaned over to whisper in her ear, most likely to tell her about Gerda's strange behavior because she took off again. Heads turned to one another to whisper concerns. My upbeat attitude about leading this book club was fast melting like snowflakes falling on water. How could we carry on a discussion with everyone coming and going? I had to grab their attention or I'd lose it for good. "The murder occurs in Chapter 3, I said a bit stridently. I lowered my pitch. "Someone has poisoned Emily Inglethorpe during the night. Poirot is brought in to investigate." Lowell burst into the library, his face as white as paper. Where the hell had he come from? I assumed he'd gone home after dinner, but obviously I was wrong. His eyes darted from face to face. He made a beeline for Rosie as she re-entered the room, followed by his wife. "Come quick! It's Sylvia! I think she's—" "No!" I cried as I sped through the living room and up the stairs. Rosie and the others followed in my wake. Maybe it was all this talk about murder, but I had a sickening feeling my friend was dying. Rex, the Gordon's golden retriever, raced past me. Todd pushed ahead, mumbling something about knowing CPR. When I reached the guest room, he was kneeling beside the bed where Sylvia lay motionless. He put his ear to her heart, then looked up at Rosie's husband, Hal, who was standing beside him. "Is she—" Hal held her wrist and checked for a pulse. We watched, breathless, as he pressed his fingers against her neck. "I'm afraid she's gone." "We can't be sure." Todd's pinched Sylvia's nostrils closed and performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. "Come on, Sylvia, breathe." Pressed down on her heart, listened, and repeated the procedure. Hal took him by the shoulders and led him away from the body on the bed. Tears filled my eyes. Minutes ago, Sylvia was with us, eating and drinking and talking about books, and now she was dead. "Her heart gave out," Rosie murmured. "I'll call 911. Hal touched my arm. "Lexie, do you have Sylvia's kids' phone numbers? They need to be told." I sobbed, too distraught to answer. Finally, I brushed away my tears. "Not with me, but I know where they live. I'll go online and get their numbers. Use the laptop in my office." Hal left, and Rosie coaxed the rest of us from the room like a mother hen. I hung back to have a moment alone with Sylvia. I bent to kiss her cheek and whispered a silent goodbye, then I closed the door behind me. I nearly collided with the small, dark figure of Gerda hovering outside the room. "My poor dear friend," she murmured. "I feel so bad." "Really?" I glared at her. "I bet you're happy she's dead."